Welcome back to the New Orleans Saints franchise, as today we have our first mock draft for the Saints Year 1 offseason. As we prepare for Season 2, we've scouted a lot of players, but it's time to take a look and see what I have projected for this draft. As you can see, these are the records, or I guess the placement of the teams. This is prior to the end of the playoffs, so some of those playoff teams will shift around a little bit. But the rest of the draft board is set, and let's jump right into it. The Saints have the 7th pick in the draft, but we're going to start off with the number 1 pick from the Cleveland Browns. I have them selecting Brody Cochran, quarterback, Ohio State. He's a little bit on the older side, but he's an Ohio State guy. He's local, loves the Browns. He is possibly the best quarterback in this draft, probably the second best behind Darren Lane, but it's really a toss-up in preference, and Brody Cochran, being a local guy, seems like the right decision. Next up, for the San Francisco 49ers with the 2nd pick, I have them selecting quarterback Darren Lane. So I have quarterbacks going 1 and 2, yet again, as they went 1 and 2 last year, and they went 1 and 2 in 2014. So, 3 straight years of that, or 2015 rather. 3 straight years of that, and I think it's probably appropriate that Darren Lane is selected. He's an excellent quarterback with a great deep ball, just an overall really good player, and I think that the 49ers, who definitely need to upgrade from Kaepernick and Gabbert, will go along this route. Next up for the Miami Dolphins, I have them selecting Jaqua Fassett, cornerback, LSU. Their corners are poor. I mean, they do have Xavier Howard, but after that, it's Byron Maxwell, and it just gets worse and worse from there. So he just seems like a good fit. He's a guy who can play zone, who can play man, a big physical corner, who I think will absolutely help overhaul their secondary immediately. And him with Rashad Jones back there, they can potentially lock up a half of a field, maybe even a little bit more if they want to move people around. Next up, we have the Chicago Bears, and I have them selecting Brandon Cartwright, offensive tackle, Notre Dame. He's my number 1 offensive tackle in this draft, and I think he just fits. They definitely need a left tackle. That's just their offensive line has hindered them way too much, and I think Cartwright's a very safe player to draft. I think he's probably the best offensive lineman in this draft by a wide margin, and they need someone to protect Jay Cutler and company. I could see them going a few different directions, but I think it's probably appropriate that they go with Brandon Cartwright in this situation. Next up, we have the New York Giants, and I have them selecting linebacker Marion Drayton out of Texas. They spent a ton of money on the defensive line and the corners, and they have a good secondary going right now. Offensive line is still good. Eli still hanging around. They could go running back here, but I think they have enough on roster that's not a necessity. Same thing with wide receiver. So I'm looking at it, and I think the Giants should go Marion Drayton. He's a big-bodied linebacker, really versatile player, really talented, someone who feels like they need on that defense to help shore things up at that level. So with that being said, let's move on to the Oakland Raiders pick. And I actually have a second linebacker going off the board in Frank Esponda out of Notre Dame. Another first-round projected player. I think the Raiders need a linebacker. Their offensive line is great. Carr is set at quarterback. Latavius Murray and company are good at running back. Tight end's too early, and linebacker is their biggest weakness as of right now. So I think Frank Esponda is a very good fit for them if they want to go linebacker route. I project that he'll be the second one taken off the board, even if I think there's some guys that are a little bit better. So that's just my thinking about that. Next up, we have the New Orleans Saints, and with Fassett and Drayton both off the board, I have the Saints selecting Cedric Spikes, running back out of Louisville. He ran for 2,000 yards this season, and they need a physical speed type of running back who can just earn yardage any way possible. And I think Spikes will definitely be able to help that, especially for the future transition when Drew Brees decides to retire in the next couple of years or so. So I think Spikes is probably an ideal fit for them with none of the other players on the board that they really were looking for, unless, of course, they trade down, but we're not going to assume that they're going to trade down. Next up for the Indianapolis Colts, I have them selecting Julius Booker, strong safety out of Lehigh. He's my number one safety on the board, and the back end of that secondary is a big issue for the Colts. While they could have gone running back if Spikes was still there, I think they might have, they could go a few directions, but offensive line kind of thins out, and they don't need a tackle. They need interior offensive line help more. And then on the other side, defensive line's been pretty stout. The linebackers, not terrible, not great. They could use an edge rusher, but they're pretty filled up there. And I think having a very good safety and someone who is really just excellent at the position would be the appropriate selection for them. For the Jets at pick number 9, I have them selecting quarterback Cortez Meeks out of Miami. They need to replace Fitzpatrick and company, and Cortez Meeks has the upside of being a top 10 quarterback in this league. He's only 21 years old, but he's well beyond his years, and I think he's a good fit for the Jets who want to be able to air it up to guys like Marshall and Decker and now Enunwa and test that secondary that they face week in and week out. In at pick number 10, I have the Houston Texans selecting Miles Stanford, free safety out of Illinois. They definitely need a safety on the back end. While their front seven is very stout and capable, I think having someone like Miles Stanford back there as a bit of an enforcer helps them out, helps their corners a bit, and he's definitely an upgrade over anyone who they have on roster. In at pick number 11, I have the Arizona Cardinals selecting right tackle Sean Shaughnessy out of Georgia. Right tackle is a major weakness on this Cardinals team. They could go in a few different directions here, maybe linebacker, maybe edge, but I think they have a lot going for them. Interior defender is also an option, but I think I'm just going to stick with a right tackle because Sean Shaughnessy is a really good player, and I think he'll help David Johnson's growth a ton moving forward, having that right tackle who he can run behind as a mauler type. With the 12th pick, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers selecting B.J. Ninehouse out of Alabama, offensive tackle. The reason that I have the Buccaneers selecting him is that Jameis Winston needs some help, and it's clear that Donovan Smith and company are just not cutting it. You can put Ninehouse on either side of the line, but either way, they can improve there. I mean, they have some other areas to improve upon. If they want to go secondary, they could, but I don't know if anybody particularly fits that should be projected in this area. Running backs, not so much. Wide receiver, I don't think they need one. So that's who I have going at pick number 12. And at pick number 13, I have the Eagles, via the Vikings, selecting Coco McLeod, the number one wide receiver in this draft class out of Georgia. They need a wide receiver big time. They need a true number one. Jordan Matthews is a good slot guy, and Aguilar probably a good third or fourth option. But they need a true number one. And what better player to go after than Coco McLeod, who is just an absolute monster at wide receiver. 6'5", he's going to be insane. We need to see his 40 time to see exactly how fast he is, but in college terms, he is running hard and running fast. Up next, we have the Cincinnati Bengals selecting edge defender Garrick Sampe out of Pittsburgh. They are a team that definitely needs some pass rushing help on the outside, and Sampe is our number one player in this draft. The fact that he drops this low is actually a little bit surprising. I could see him going higher, maybe to New Orleans, to Indianapolis, to maybe Chicago, something along those lines. But Sampe is an extremely talented player, and for him to be here at 14 is a steal for the Bengals. Up next, we have Roy McAllister, defensive tackle, USC, going to the Denver Broncos. They need a true interior defender to go along with Derek Wolfe. Bjorn Werner and Sylvester Williams are just not cutting it for them. So that's one of those things that he just seems to be a good fit. McAllister is a very good player, can probably play nose tackle, potentially even play 3-4 defensive end, whatever you need him to. And that'll help bolster a Broncos defensive line that has declined a little bit since the loss of Malik Jackson. Next up, we have the Seattle Seahawks going offensive tackle in the first round once again. This time they select a left tackle, George Humber out of LSU. Humber's a really good offensive tackle. He's my number 2, even though Ninehouse is going to be going ahead. Some teams like him better. I think Humber's a better player. It's a good pick for the Seahawks to bolster that offensive line to help out someone like Russell Wilson, who he got sacked a lot this past season, over 50 times for the Seahawks, and they missed the playoffs because of it. So that's one of those things that's important to get him a little bit more help. In at 17, we have the Green Bay Packers selecting David Snead, defensive tackle, Clemson. Another guy to help bolster that defensive line. They need it. Pairing him with Mike Daniels and company should be a huge benefit to that Packers front line. And I think the secondary solid linebackers are pretty good. So I think he's a pretty good fit. In at number 18, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars selecting Demetri McCown, corner, Penn State. McCown is a very good player, and I think that the Jaguars, who have invested a lot into the youth at various positions around the team, could either go offensive line or go corner. And I don't think the offensive line at this point is particularly good enough to warrant going after someone. They could go after someone like Deshaun Sanford here, an offensive guard, but I think Demetri McCown helps shore up that secondary a little bit more, as obviously they're building that defense with Jalen Ramsey, Dante Fowler, and now Demetri McCown in the past 3 first rounds. With the 19th pick in the first round, I have the Baltimore Ravens selecting wide receiver Darian Strickland out of Stanford. They need a lot at wide receiver, with Steve Smith getting up there in years, potentially in his final season now. Kamar Aiken's good. Mike Wallace is all right, but in terms of overall talent, wide receiver is a very good position this year, especially in the first couple rounds. So it's one of those things that it probably would fit the mold for the Ravens to go after a wide receiver who can help out Joe Flacco. If there was better corners for them as of right now, maybe they would be going in that direction, but I think Darian Strickland's a safe pick at wide receiver. He's a big guy, someone who you definitely would like to have for someone like Joe Flacco, who likes to air it up and throw those high point passes. In at 20, we have the Carolina Panthers selecting C.J. Ball, cornerback, Kentucky. Corner has been a major issue for the Panthers since getting rid of Josh Norman by not re-signing him. So with that being said, why not go after C.J. Ball, who is a zone corner, a very good player for them. He can fulfill a role similar to what Norman played, obviously maybe not as good, but in a similar fashion. And that's something that should be considered for them, as he's a quality player for sure, and they do need help in that secondary. After that, we have the Detroit Lions, and I have them going to Deshaun Sanford, offensive guard, Clemson. Sanford definitely will help out. He's a really good offensive guard. He's our number 1 interior offensive lineman in this draft, and they need help on the offensive line, especially between the tackles. They do have some needs elsewhere, but I think their defense can sustain enough, and I don't know if there's any corners that they want to go after at this point. It might be a little bit too early, but if they want to pair a good corner with Darius Slay, I would say that the ideal person would be Jamil Janis out of Pittsburgh. So after that, we have the Tennessee Titans in at pick number 22, and I have them selecting Tyrone McElrath, wide receiver, Notre Dame. He is a 5'9 speedster at wide receiver, but you know what? He fits exactly what they want to do with Marcus Mariota. Short, quick passing and relying on yards after the catch. I think McElrath can fulfill that role pretty well for them, and they definitely need to improve upon that wide receiving core. In at 23, I have the Buffalo Bills selecting Rashawn Stroud, linebacker out of Florida. An interesting selection because they do have some pretty good linebackers, but they haven't been as good as advertised. Stroud is a really good player. You can put him on the edge. You can put him in at linebacker itself. There's really no guarantee which one is his defined role. So he's someone that you can move around a little bit. And he's just a great playmaker, someone that I think the Bills would be very happy to have. They could go wide receiver in this situation, but I think with Sammy Watkins and company, I think they're in a pretty good spot at least at this point. Up next, we have the Tennessee Titans with their second pick of the draft because they acquired that from the Los Angeles Rams in the trade that ended up netting the Rams Jared Goff. The Titans in this pick will select Cason Justice, defensive tackle out of UCLA. Basically, they need some help up the middle to pair with Jarrell Casey and company, and I think that's a perfect fit for them. Very good player in case injustice, can play nose tackle, can help in the run defense game, and he just seems like a good fit for them when they already addressed wide receiver, and they could go interior offensive line, but I think defensive tackle makes more sense for a team that already made the playoffs and wants to continue to get better. At pick number 25, I have the Washington Redskins going linebacker Markeith Ridley out of Tennessee. If they have one weakness on that defense, I mean, they have a few, but the biggest weakness has to be that linebacking core, and I think Ridley is a very good player, can fly sideline to sideline, will help in coverage, will help in the run game as well, and he's just someone that I think they're pretty set at wide receiver, running back, they could go someone here, but I think they're pretty set in that area, and I would not be surprised to see them go with Markeith Ridley in this spot. In at 26, the Browns have their second pick of the draft. This was acquired from the Eagles, which helped get the Eagles Carson Wentz. With this pick, the Browns select Jameel Janis, cornerback, Pittsburgh. He is a man-press corner, the best man coverage corner in this draft class, and he's someone who can immediately pair outside with Joe Hayden and wreak havoc for a Browns secondary that continues to need improvement. Addressing quarterback and then addressing that seems like it's a pretty good combination, and I would not be surprised to see them go in a direction of corner. They could go a zone corner depending on what they want to run, but that's definitely something that I think with Janis on the board, unless you want to go linebacker or something of that nature, I think corner makes the most sense for them. In at pick number 27, the Atlanta Falcons select Doral Eccles, linebacker, Clemson. Another linebacker for another linebacker-needy team. Obviously, Paul Warlow and company are just not good enough, and I think Eccles is a very good player. A little surprised that he would drop this far, but there are a lot of really good linebackers in this draft class, and I have him going to the Falcons here. In at pick number 28, I have the Chiefs selecting Kadir Beckham, wide receiver out of Miami. They need someone to pair along with Maclin to put maybe in the slot, or maybe to put Tyreek Hill or Chris Conley in the slot, but I think Kadir Beckham is a big upgrade for them. This is a point where there's still a lot of good players, but not a lot of good players at the specific needs for the Chiefs. If they want to go zone corner, they could, but I think it's probably safer to go with the quality wide receiver in Kadir Beckham. Up next for the San Diego Chargers, I have them selecting Kason Brown, edge rusher, Miami. You see what Bosa's done on the inside. You see what Melvin Ingram's done on the outside. Putting a second quality edge rusher will help out that defense tremendously for the Chargers, and I think he's a good player. Definitely will help improve that pass rush and could potentially propel the Chargers even further. The fact that they made it this far into the season, it could be a big deal moving forward. In at pick number 30, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Aaron Wilkins, edge rusher, North Texas. So another team that needs an edge rusher as James Harrison starts to get to the point where he's probably going to be retiring, etc. I think that Aaron Wilkins is a very good player, tall player who can do a lot for that defense. He seems like an ideal fit in terms of size and overall ability for a team like Pittsburgh, and he's just too good to pass up in the first round. In at pick number 31, I have the Dallas Cowboys selecting Shaquille Page from Miami, tight end. With Jason Witten getting older, I don't think that they have enough faith in someone like Gavin Escobar. And at pick 31, I think Shaq Page, who is probably very close to a first-round projected player, I have him as a second-rounder, but that's just because there's a lot of talent. The Cowboys do need some things that obviously they could address. Wide receiver, not so much, but tight end, yes. Maybe a little help on the defensive interior or something along those lines. But all in all, I think that Shaq Page is a good successor for Witten, especially if Witten decides to announce his retirement now. And lastly, we have the New England Patriots as the 32nd pick. After not having a draft selection last season, they are back on the board, and their selection is Jameek Davey, edge rusher out of Ole Miss. Davey is a really good finesse rusher, and I think he really helps out on a Patriots team that is stacked at pretty much every position outside of edge rusher. So he's a player that I would very much expect to see taken in the first round. I think with that in mind, it would not be smart to pass up on him. And that wraps up this mock draft. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll have a second one coming to you guys on Monday, where we will outline everything following the combine, where things will matter a little bit more. Obviously, the rankings will change, but I'll be documenting all of that. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm Moonlight Swami, and I'll be talking to you guys later. Peace!